Greetings, people. Analysis of predictive history, part 3. History and predictions. So last time we saw that predictive history is a content, is a concept, but I didn't really dwell more into it. I went more into the details of the model that Professor Jiang articulates. So let's look, prior to that, let's look to the very concept of predictive history and how it can be the target for critics and the appeal it can have, also the interest. So history, as I mentioned in the first video, can refer to pretty much all the spectrum of transference of information or recollection of information, recording information. And it can relate to all different types of validities, from lies to verified information that has been tested again and again. But now it refers also to different natures of information transmitted. So, for instance, the highest order of validity for an information would be the strict description live of what's happening right in front of someone, with the least amount of subjective interpretation past the subjective or relative perception of the person, the point of view, and so on. So you see someone is basically filming something. It can refer to the prior to AI. If you could see the person filming and you could see exactly the content filmed, it could refer to the highest order of validity of an information. Someone is transmitting exactly what is happening at the time it is happening, with only the limits of the means of perception, the mediums used. But now, a funny thing is that we do not use the term story or history, especially not the term history in this case, to depict people who do this are not historians. Most of the time they're called journalists. So journaling is the recording of events, of personal experiences and whatnot, and it's a great source of for historians, for some historians. Now we get to, when you go into the academic discipline of history, the methods and the means and the goals are not unified at all. So I want to show that the attacks that are based on the concept of predictive history may not be so solid. So when they attack predictive history as an invalid form of history, as an academic endeavor and not as a storyline or as fiction, there's a few biases. So, for instance, what types of histories can we recognize? You go into the past, people can gather tracks, signs, physical artifacts that have been left by prior humans, and they will weave together the layers at which they found them, the other elements that are found besides, and compare them between different places. The people who do that are not called historians either. Most of the time they're called archaeologists. But archaeologists in some ways are types of historians. They're material historians. Now you may have historians that do things even of another order, that will take the artifacts that are found and try to reconstruct their uses, the actual practices. So there again we find the use of the threefold matrix of matter, energy, information. What something is, the states, the beings, what something does or changes or moves. So the actions, movements, flows, and what something perceives, thinks, understands or knows, or regulates, governs, and so on. Part of information. So you can have historians that are focused on matter. They look for material tracks of the past. You can have historians that are focused on energy. They look for records of the flows of the movements, the migrations, or they look at the actual actions. So you have historians of techniques, for instance. People like Leroy was a French historian, was taking the many artifacts that had been found from prehistory on, and was actually experimenting with them, trying to see how you could make them work, what you could do with them, and trying to reconstruct the actual techniques from the tools that were used. So in the same way, it could be, some people could be attacking this idea by saying he has no way of knowing exactly how they were used, but there are only a limited number of ways a tool can be used efficiently. So if you do not suppose that the people from the past were completely stupid, notably because they survived long enough to give birth to this amazing peoples that we are, then you'd get the idea at one point or another they go for efficiency. And if people depend for their lives on something like lighting the fire and whatnot, most of the time they'll go for something very efficient. Although here also we could get sidetracked and project our own perceptions of what's important into the past. So people like Jiang from the Shields tells the story of him and students getting to visit San people in Botswana and seeing one light a fire, friction fire, with two people, and in a very inefficient manner that broke down the entire narrative of the super survivors. And at one point when they started to inquire as to, obviously these people could light fire faster than this, and asking about that, they had an interesting answer, which was that sure they could light it faster, but the process here was more social in nature. It was the fact of doing something together and harmonizing together rather than playing alone. So it's faster to create a music play by oneself, but it's more fun to do it with two, and it has more implications for the life of the society of the time. So when we project our own biases of efficiency, materialism and whatnot into the past, already we need to be careful. So Leroy was an historian of techniques, how to do things. You find that in, if you're familiar with historical martial arts, you have many people delving into old manuscripts and old weapons and whatnot, and trying to reconstruct, either through practice or through adherence to the written tracks, the written record, trying to reconstruct what the actual methods of fighting could have been. And the same can be said of people who recreate battles through war games, with them live or in live action role-playing games and whatnot. So there also you have always this thing, you can never know the past is gone, but you have tracks and signs, and you have although the past is very different from the present in many ways, you have both changes, innovations, new things, and conservations. And through conservation, similarities, general principles that would still apply, although much later. So from these things, you're always playing in between, trying to weave your story. So now when history is used, it can be used to explain the past, it can be used to help navigate the present, or it can be used to predict the future, which allows for many different things like preparing for this future, altering this future, and so on. So if you see someone doing something, aiming in a direction with a gun, and you warn him that he might kill someone inadvertently while cleaning his gun or something like this, you're predicting a potential future. But you can use this prediction to try to alter the course of this future, or you can use it by moving aside and reacting to the potential future that is being prepared. You have a couple of other possibilities always, but so predictive history would be different from the goal of it, and the practice of it would obviously be different from what is done when you try to explain the past. So once again, if we take it at a big scale at which Professor Jiang is starting, it's somewhat difficult to understand the core of it, or the basis of it, and it's very easy to attack by a specialist. But if you get back to one's everyday life, you use all the historical patterns that we saw last time, like the core memory that you have of all the events of all the world. So all this comes from what you perceived, through the filters of how you interpreted it, but it comes also from all the things that were told or transmitted or communicated to you directly, or through books, through education, conditioning, and whatnot. So all this content is the information matter that will build up your world. From all this matter, you create the present. So the felt present is not just this spatialized present which is broken down into small pieces. It's more the duration described by Bergson. It's a feeling of, it's not the feeling of the now, because as soon as the now is there, it's gone, and it's tied already in your perception. Any moment is completely tied to duration, to several types of feelings that extend for longer. Although at one point you could focus on one accurate moment and feeling, and the actual plasticity of it is much bigger than when we think about it in terms of space, where we picture it as a point tied to a line, for instance. So this perception of duration can be described as the feeling of a river. You feel the push of the past, you feel the traction of the future, you feel like goals, ideas, visions, potentials that maybe you projected yourself or other projected, like lines in the future, and they get attached to something, and when you're trying both to drag them towards you, but basically they're dragging you towards them at the same time, and you're navigating the present. So push from the past, navigation of the present, and traction of the future. So this is a model that George Land was using, and which is quite interesting. So when you're projecting into the future, you're trying to make sense and prepare and order, create a frame of reference to navigate what you'll do during all the different journeys you'll have to take in your life, or in your day, or in the next few minutes. And you do that by taking in this massive information of the past, identifying these recurrences, these patterns, these categories that you project into the future. When you look back at the past, you're trying to make sense of the past. And you may try to make sense of it. You can revisit the past with new models, new ways of thinking about it, that would give you a sort of agency on what has been already done, but left tracks, left signs on you, shaped you in many ways, in the same way as the pressure of the pour will shape the substrate below. We are shaped by these pressures from the past, and when we try to make sense of it, we can revisit the past, and we cannot obviously alter the actual events, but we can change the way we make sense of them, or we can change the way we perceive them. And actually, when you do hypnosis, or you do NLP, or several types of rituals, you have ways. Native Indians or sportsmen now use practices like this. You revisit your failures and you correct them in your mind. You replay the movie, but you change the ending, and you change the way you went through it, so that you do not build up distrust, but you correct and create trust. So the matter that is seen with predicting is just it's a lack of habit due to many things. Like history is commonly not used to predict events, because first it doesn't work well. Because on another level, it is although way back the scholars that were people devoting themselves to knowledge would apply part of their knowledge to try to see these recurrences, these patterns, and predict events. So they would be called, they would do divination, they would become astrologers and whatnot, read the starry script, and they would do that to predict events, to provide agency for the king or whatnot, or allow for preparations or influence choices. But since at one point there's a big divide into the way we perceive things, the subjective interpretation is removed, and we keep the interpretation of what can be shared, like what can be seen by many people at the same time. And we try to minimize personal interpretation, the meaning that's given to things. So that happens slowly over a long period of time, but it's at its peak now in many ways. So science for the last century, the main corpus of science as a collective narrative, considered, for instance, that teleology, the fact that things may have goals, had to be removed. So you did a lot of biology with a postulate that there was absolutely you couldn't imply goals for any other beings apart from humans. and it went to fairly strong extremes, and that can be debated many different ways. Obviously, you do not have the same goals. The way you define goals for humans cannot be applied to anything else than humans. And for humans, the way you define goal for an individual is not the same as the way you define goal for a society, for instance. So the same would apply to your cells. Your cells do go towards things or go away from things. They have directions, hence they have sort of goals. They have functions, things they try to do. So you could say they have goals, just the scale of the goals and the order and the actual nature of the goals may not be the same. They may not have philosophical goals or political goals, but they will have goals that would be, you'd call physiological. Maybe they would have type of social goals in relationship to interactions with others and so on. So now the problem with history being used to make prediction is that more often than not it's wrong, and then if it's perceived as like many soothsayer, many fortune teller ended badly when kings turned against them, and then you get to all this big problem of what is the nature of the future. Is it something that already exists? You could go to what's the nature of time, but what's the nature of the future and what's the nature of the ability to project into the future is the core of a lot of reflections for humanity. And one of them in modern times that you may have seen, which is poor rendition, but is the Dune series. I advise much more the reading of the books, and one of the themes there is the power of prophecy and prediction to actually shape people and shape events to a point where there's absolutely no way for them to know what's doing what. Am I seeing the future and changing it because I have been forewarned? Or am I, in the instance of the hunters cleaning the guns, am I telling the guy, watch out, you'll shoot someone by doing it, and by doing so maybe shout and startle him, and then off goes the shot? Am I creating the future I'm trying to avoid? That's the very common theme in Greek tragedy, for instance, the Orestia and the Oedipus. So, problem with prediction, which you see now, Professor Jiang was mentioning it not too long ago. Now that he has reached a certain level of popularity and spread, the model he infers and pushes into the world will be listened to by many people. They will be listened to by other players, people of influence. And these people of influence will use the projections he makes to actually change their own projections. And you go into loops. But these loops were there from the beginning. The way you think about the world creates the way you will react and behave, and this will create the reactions that the other have towards you. If you project that the world, for instance, in game theory is a zero-sum game where everybody is fighting everybody else, you project that in the nature of the world, more for you is less for me. So if I want more, I need to take it away from you. But if you want more, if you get more, it means that I have less. So I have to fight you to prevent that, to avoid that. So if I go for this narrative, which is the basic narrative around game theory, what world will I create? Is say the world, you may have many critics as to what's the modern world really is and whatnot. But still, compared to slavery in the Roman Empire, in many aspects, it's, for many people, even the slaves, it's somewhat more benign. But you have energetic slaves and so on, so the comparison would not hold. But still, one aspect is it's more benign because in between you would have the influence of things like Christianity or spreading moral influence, but other types of moral influences. But like it or not, Christianity and the New Testament brought some sort of approach towards the weak, towards the poor, and changed completely the nature of the game mentally. Obviously, it didn't change much the game physically, not much, but still a bit. And still a bit can be something quite remarkable. If you go back in some big empires, like the idea that any person could have rights and so on, held, well, citizens held right, but that the slave, that the weak ones, that the losers held rights, meant nothing at all. You killed everybody, you raped the rest, and carried them home as plunder. So you have a wide variety of societies, of histories and whatnot, so generalizations like this would not amount to much either. Still, when you have depictions of a future as a return to nation states and all like more centered on the nations and all that, all these words, nation state, didn't exist prior to the 19th century. Prior to the end of the 19th century. Prior to that, you were in the world of feudality and monarchy. You were referring to your suzerain, and you were a vassal. So you were not a member of a collective that was defined by borders, by a country. You were linked to people. And you could be the Habsburg elsewhere in Spain, in Austria, as well as the Netherlands. So the coming back to a smaller definition of self, as though it would be a better order of things, a more natural order of things, is to my mind a big mistake. It doesn't mean that you do need deeply to have a return to self-agency at all levels, the permaculture style, but at the same time you need to think global, like you need to find ways to perceive the entire world you live in as a part of yourself. But so this is just a depiction of the fact that the predictions we make are based on categories and ideas, and when we use these ideas to project things in the future and whatnot, we always, at the same time, it's like you throw things in the ocean, the boundless ocean. And what you throw to know the oceans are containers of different shapes. They're the containers you have with you. When you drag back the containers, the ones that arrive back at you, they contain water that is exactly the shape of your containers, and some that's dripping to the side, but you forget about it, and you look inside, and what is the ocean made of? It's made of all the sum of all these phases and whatever things you threw at the ocean. So that's always a big issue. That's why there's a lot of push against the idea of predictive history, although the concept itself is something that's done pretty much every day. Now, the Professor Jiang gets trapped himself sometimes in this game. You predict something once you've decided that it is what will happen. You're trapped. You're trapped in your own, in a trap of your own doing. The future, if it's preordained at the time you speak, there's actually no living. There's no change. There's nothing to do. So you're better off not knowing anything, and any idea of a predictive history that would work would be just a massive trap. It's the nightmare of some of the AI traps. So the prediction as a forewarning, as a preparation, but not as a pollution of the present, is very helpful and very necessary. The prediction as a predefinition of the future, to get trapped in it, is useless.